Hello and welcome. It's Wednesday. You're tuned into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Tim Dennis has the day off. I want you to all keep Tim in your thoughts and prayers. He's going through a lot right now, especially today, as he is going in to have his foot evaluated and reevaluated again for possible surgery. So if you can please keep him in your thoughts and prayers, it would mean a lot to us. Tim has had a rough year with health issues, and we want him back on his feet theoretically and in reality. So anything you can pour his way, love and affection, and make sure you visit him on his Facebook page and follow him on Twitter at Dr. Tim Dennis, and just give him some love to let him know you're thinking about him. I know we'd been advertising the fact that we were going to talk to Eric Freeman of the House of Wills, the Haunted House of Wills. To be honest with you, I recorded the episode, and we had some weird issues with the recording. And when I finally uploaded it to Tim, it was a corrupt file. Nothing was working properly. So we weren't able to get the interview. So that's what happened to that episode. It'll be one of the lost episodes of Beyond the Darkness. We may try to visit with him again in the future and see if we can get that interview. I just know he has a very busy schedule. And yeah, you heard that right. I upload the episodes when I record these to Tim. So even when he's in the hospital, or he is on respite, he is still working for the show, editing, putting it all together, making it sound as good as he can. So, again, keep Tim in your thoughts and prayers. Joining us today, though, last minute, he was willing to jump in with us, a good friend of ours. As a matter of fact, it's hard to believe it's been 5 years since he first visited our show talking about the Black-Eyed Kids, and he was our first guest at the new Beyond the Darkness episode. He's back with us tonight. David Weatherly is an investigator, author, and world explorer. He's spent his life pursuing the world of the strange, investigating cases from around the globe, and he's researched and written on a diverse range of topics, including cryptozoology, hauntings, ufology, ancient mysteries, shamanism, and psychic phenomena. He's back with us tonight because Ripley's is haunted. Believe it or not, he's here to talk to us about his investigations of some of the Ripley's museums. David Weatherly, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Dave. It's always a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, I love chatting with you. And when you told me that you've been investigating some of the Ripley's, believe it or not, museums, because there are claims of hauntings, I knew we had to talk about this. I went out to San Francisco to investigate Alcatraz. And prior to that, we had made a stop at the Ripley's Museum there. I wanted to check it out. And just talking to some of the employees, they asked what I was in town for. I told them I'm going to do a paranormal investigation over in Alcatraz. They're like, you should investigate here. This place is crazy. There's nights I don't even want to be here. You can hear people walking and talking. You can hear weird screams. So we kind of chatted, and I'm like, why would the museum be so haunted? And they explained to me what their theory was. I know that the Ripley's in Los Angeles has been in a couple of the paranormal TV shows, but you've been working in a couple of different locations that have nothing to do with San Francisco or Los Angeles. What brought you to the Ripley's museums that you investigated?
Well, actually, they contacted us. Some folks running the Ripley's in Panama City, Florida. They were looking for someone, with some experience and clout in the area to come in and see if we could verify some of the things that they were experiencing. As you say, late at night, I mean, some of the employees were having odd things happen to them, and some of them were nervous being in parts of the museum and so forth. So, we went down and investigated the place. It's a pretty fascinating experience, I can tell you, Dave. And
well, Dave, I'm curious. You get called to do an investigation of a very touristy place like this. Does it ever cross your mind that maybe they're just looking for a little PR to bring new interest to, these staples that have been around forever that maybe people aren't visiting as much?
No, absolutely, Dave. And I tell you, there's some of those locations that have contacted me in the past that I've just taken a pass on it and said, well, my schedule's really busy, or just, whatever excuse. But the thing is with Ripley, see, I was very intrigued for a number of reasons. One is that, probably like you, growing up, you saw all this stuff about Robert Ripley, and he's a pretty fascinating character just himself. But then there's this whole idea of these museums that were originally his idea. He called them auditoriums. And you don't hear the term quite as much anymore. I know some of the Ripleys are starting to use it some. But his original concept was that he would have these auditoriums all over the world, and they would be essentially, a very different twist on a museum because they would have artifacts that he had gathered from his world travels. And there's a few misconceptions about the Ripley's museums because I know when we investigated the first one, there were a few comments saying, well, no, all that stuff in there is fake or it's all just, props or whatever. Well, here's the thing. There are some items in the Ripley's museums that are recreations, that, are replicas of some of the odd things that Ripley found, and he just wanted, it to be shown in multiple locations. However, a good portion of the objects that are in these museums are genuine artifacts. And Ripley, He traveled the world several times over. I mean, the guy traveled the globe the first time when he was, I think 32 or something. So, we're talking about the early 1920s. A lot of people hadn't been exposed to many of the things that he was bringing back. He brought back shrunken heads. And, those are in a lot of the Ripley's museums. And Dave, they're genuine. These are actually human heads. It's a little bit mind-boggling when you see one the first time because you you experience this bizarre, like you want to laugh, but at the same time, this is really unsettling.
Right.
Because, here's a head the size of maybe, a regular man's fist. And that is a human head that these older cultures had a process to shrink it down to that size. Those are genuine. And, you talk about why some of these places might be haunted. Well, that's a good example right there. We go to the concept that a lot of artifacts and antique pieces can hold energy, whether it's residual energy or whether there's something, of a conscious energy that is attached to it. I think that's one level of what's going on in some of these Ripley's museums. And then, of course, you compound that with the fact that some of the Ripleys are in historic buildings.
Right.
So, the one we just investigated in Ocean City, Maryland, the first part of that building was built in the 1920s. It was originally a ballroom or a dance hall. So, that particular place, you get into this historical aspect. Ocean City has long been a tourist destination, but it was also back in the days of Prohibition, sort of right on that corridor where a lot of booze was being run from the Eastern Shore and up into Wilmington, Delaware, and over into Chicago and everything. So, you get the whole fascinating historical aspect of it too.
Just when you were talking about the shrunken heads, you grew up in the same time era I did. Do you remember Vincent Price's shrunken head kit you could get?
Oh, yes.
Where you'd get the apples and you'd carve the face in and then you'd bake them and it would make these shrunken head designs?
That's right.
The shrunken heads, that was a really fascinating aspect because when I was in the San Francisco Museum and I was talking to them, that was the first thing that they pointed out. They said in the case that they had one of the original shrunken heads, and they admitted that a few were props because people had tried to pass them off as the real thing. And I think they even had the Vincent Price shrunken head kit there to kind of show, and talk about. But they said that one or two of the heads were legitimate shrunken heads, and they said that they would get on the security cameras, they would get weird disturbances on the camera in that hall that always seemed to emanate right near that case. They would hear screams at night, and that really unnerved them, and they believed that it definitely was coming from the shrunken head case. And that was enough. I mean, I got a nice little tour. They showed us around and brought us to the points. And you could get that vibe because, like you said, when you first see him, it just looks bizarre. And
it really does.
It's hard to believe, but what they've done, it's not voodoo, it's not magic. It's actually like a form of boiling that they do to shrink this down and tanning and all that. It's just a very weird, intricate kind of task to do, but you see these and then, they're frightening. They've stitched the lips shut and they're really freaky pieces of art. And there are still people that buy and trade those and they're selling for like $10,000 to $20,000 a pop.
Oh yeah.
For a real shrunken
head. It's one of those, macabre collectibles, as they call them.
And I'm going to be 50 this year, Dave. So if you're looking for the perfect gift for me, a shrunken head,
I'll keep that in mind, buddy.
No thanks.
I might have a line on one somewhere,
Oh, God. No thanks.
Yeah. was creepy in Panama City. They have 3 of them, and they're hanging in this display case all together, and they're kind of hanging at different levels. And the woman one of the people who showed us around that Ripley's, she was telling us a story about having to clean that case and do some stuff inside, of the display, and that she had to handle one of them at one point. And, to this day, she's very disturbed by having to touch the thing, because she said it had this really weird, slimy texture, from the fact that then the skin turns color too. For people who've never seen one of these things, they usually take on a very dark, almost black appearance. And, it's because of the herbs and things that they used in the boiling process to shrink these down. But she talked about how unsettling it was having to touch one of those things to move it. And what was fascinating was that the area where that's displayed in Panama City, they do sort of themes in Ripley's for folks who have never been inside one. So they'll put different areas of display, and they'll usually have an area they call the tribal room. Sometimes it's more than one room. And in Panama City, it's a pretty big area. That's the tribal area. And essentially they mean tribal artifacts from all over the world, from Africa, from the Pacific Islands, and so forth. And this particular area where the shrunken heads hang in Panama City, it's in a center case. And along the walls around it, there are all these different artifacts. Well, we were investigating in there and literally heard, it was very brief, but we heard what sounded like a drum, an old-fashioned hand drum. Well, sure enough, we turned around, where we were, and looked in one of the display cases, and there was a drum there right across from where the heads were. And that was picked up on recording too. And it's this, it's one of those anomalies that, how do you explain that? This weird residual energy of this drum playing very quickly. And that's one of the strange things that occurred in the Panama City investigation. But I've got another one that really kind of capped that investigation off for me, Dave. I'm sure you're well familiar with the SLS cam that our friend Bill Chappell built, and many listeners will be familiar with that. This is the camera for those who aren't real familiar that shows the sort of stick figures when something is trying to manifest.
Right.
And we were in
it's featured on Ghost Adventures a lot. So if our viewers have watched it, they'll see it on Ghost Adventures. They're using that camera that actually scatters 1 billion pinpoints of light around a room. So if it finds a form, it will kind of connect to it. And if it's reading it as a human form, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, it will actually map in a stick figure showing you that's where it was. So yeah, I just wanted to give our listeners a little heads up that might not be familiar with it. It used to be called, I think, like the X cam, the Kinect cam, right? SLS cam. That's what it's referred to now.
Right. And, Zach and the guys have caught some really impressive, captures with that thing. It's always fascinating to see what they come up with, but I think I can go toe to toe with this one, Dave, because we were in the tribal area. Now there is a table in there that is, it's probably 2 feet off the floor. It's a round wooden table that was hand carved. On the sides, there are these decorative figures. It's African in origin. The top is flat. However, there's an area of that table that is stained because this table was an executioner's table. They would literally put the person down on this table and behead them. Now, I was running the SLS cam pointed at this executioner's table. And this clip is online. I should have sent it to you beforehand. We threw this together so fast, but I will send it to you. We watched a figure manifest on the SLS cam beside the table. Dave, it flops down as if it's kneeling at the table. The torso lays down on the table, and then the head disappears.
Get out of here.
And then it vanishes. The whole thing vanishes. And I was so, I was so, elated and mystified and just mind boggled by this capture. It's just, it is incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
Now, is that the one, I'm looking at your website. I'm looking at the website. Is it the one that looks like there's a shrunken head in the glass? Is that the same video that it's in?
There is I will have to send it to you because there are a lot of Ripley's videos on there, but there is a...
Send me a link, yeah, and we'll post it with this episode so that people can actually go check it out on our Podcast One page.
I absolutely will. We did a shorter version that has, in the beginning in that room, I'll tell you this story too. This room, this is the Panama City Ripley's again. Right. And the ceilings are incredibly high. Now, when we first got in, the people who took us on the tour through Ripley's and everything, the guy was telling us, a fellow named Brandon, he's a really great guy. He was telling us that he constantly heard these anomalous knocking sounds and rappings in this room. Now, the Ripley's in Panama City, the outside of it looks like a ship, kind of like a Titanic type of theme. And the room with all the tribal stuff, the ceiling is really high. It's open. There's ventilation and metal and all kinds of stuff up there. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's interesting, but we got a lot of possible things that could explain that, you know. So we had them shut off, any kind of air or heating, anything like that might make a sound. And we started getting these rapping sounds. Well, they were responding to us. Whatever it was responding, seemingly in an intelligent manner. We'd say, all right, make that sound 3 times. Bang, bang, bang. Okay, well, do it twice. And we did all these elaborate things, and it was so daggone consistent that it seemed like something was responding. And I honestly, I'm still kind of on the fence with that one. That kind of evidence, it's fascinating. At the same time, your brain has a logical investigator is going, okay, well, could it be this? Could it be, how could we explain this? So that was sort of early on in the investigation. And then later we had that capture with the SLS cam in that same room. And it was just, it was so incredible. And actually we had another incident.
Well, hold on 1 second. When you show the staff of Ripley's that video with the figure mapping in and flopping down on the death table, I would pay $1 million if I had it to be the fly on the wall to watch their reaction. How did they react to that, David?
Exactly as you would expect. They were just they looked at it over and over, and they didn't know what to say. They really didn't know what to say. And it was pretty amazing. But we had another crazy incident in that same room. There is what they dubbed a hate god in there, HATE, hate god. Now, what this actually is, and I've seen several of these things. There's one in Panama City. I saw one in the Ripley's in Copenhagen. There's one in Ocean City. It is a wooden statue. It's African in origin. That is carved to resemble some type of humanoid type of figure. And the story behind this is that when you wanted someone cursed, you would go to the shaman or the witch doctor or whatever term you prefer to use. You would go to this man, you would pay your fee, and you would say, you would lay out your case. I want this guy cursed.
Right.
He would do a ritual process, and part of that ritual process, the culmination of it was driving a nail or a spike into this fetish, into this totem. So Ripley brought some of these things back, and there's like hundreds of nails in them. Old rusted nails from the old times when these practitioners would do this with these things. So there's one of these in Panama City. We had an Andes box. That is, for those not familiar with it, it's essentially a ghost box. It's along the lines of a Frank's box or a Hat Shack and that type of thing. It scans through frequencies.
Right. And again, for radio frequencies, You've probably seen it on shows like Ghost Adventures. They call it the SB7. There's the Shack Hacks, the Frank's boxes, all of that. And the radio, it's basically a mutated radio that just scans frequencies but never stops, using audio remnants to see if you can communicate with it. And I have a really weird story I'll share next Monday about my current visit to the Palmer House using one of those. But okay, so nice. You've got this spirit box. What happened?
So, the idea is, as you said, that the spirits can use, manifest words through this box by using that energy. We set this thing on a shelf underneath this hate god. Now, a good friend of mine, Dave Spinks, was investigating with me, and he's the one who actually reached down. He turned this box on, and clear as a bell out of this box, it says, "Get ready, Spinks." And then the box says, "Behold." And the box does this weird fritzing sound, and it stopped scanning and shut down. And that was it. It wouldn't work anymore. Now, Dave took the box home, and a few days later tried it again. It was acting completely normal. But the whole rest of the time we were at Ripley's, it would not function at all. So, again, something, and this was in that weird room with all the tribal artifacts, so something manifested and tried to, make a very clear point, which I think it did.
Yeah, obviously, and it's able to manipulate and affect mechanical devices. You're in a place like this, again, you're kind of in the mindset, because it's a creepy, cool location. They've got really interesting and fascinating artifacts throughout the entire building. And when you're in this creepier aspect of it and you're doing this, I mean, part of it is you have to sit there and I'm sure, keep yourself in check as well to make sure you're not over blowing what's going on or reading too much into it.
Absolutely. Well, as an investigator, I've been doing this so long that a lot of the common things, I really question and say, okay, well, what can we back that up with? We personally like to try to get confirmation on multiple devices at the same time. I think if you're getting one singular thing that's kind of fascinating, like the wrapping on the ceiling or something like that, it's compelling, but at the same time, that doesn't satisfy me. I want to dig in and get more. And I want to say, okay, well, if you can do this, what else can you do? How else can you demonstrate that, that there's a presence here, or that, how else can we determine that there's some kind of residual energy here? And, this is one of the areas I think that technology certainly has become a great benefit to people who are investigating the paranormal, because now we have so many different devices that, the truth is they're all experimental. Because we're all explorers in this realm, and we're all trying to utilize whatever we can to get answers. But it's amazing to me when you can get answers on multiple pieces of equipment that are all pointing in the same direction and confirming the same type of thing. That's pretty amazing.
Right. Yeah, that definitely takes you and puts you into a different mindset and a different place. Now, as you're continuing to investigate this, and you're getting around here, first of all, what is it, your average time span that you spent working on this? How many hours were you at this location?
We were at the Ripley's in Panama City for 2 nights, and we spent most of the night there. So, we don't, I know a lot of teams will go in and just do an hour or two and call it a night, but certainly not my preferred process, Dave Spinks and I investigate together a lot as Society of the Supernatural, which is what the video clips are under. And, you'll find that we usually try to spend 2 or 3 nights in a location and do the whole night. So, we really like to dig in. There's a lot of places we've gone back to multiple times, because they are so fascinating. Now that Ripley's in Panama City, we did 2 nights. Well, in Ocean City, we did 2 nights there too. Well,
that was Panama City. Okay. So was there any other strange finds from that location?
There was a lot in Panama City, to tell you the truth. There was an incident. Now, I don't know if you and I have ever talked much about this, but, my background is spiritually is shamanism. I was trained by a lot of different shamanic teachers from various cultures. So that's always kind of been my path. And it's interesting for me being in an area like that with all these tribal artifacts. I find that things will sometimes interact with me on a different level than they will, some of the other guys. So I had a pretty strange experience in Ripley with a statue that's in there. Again, it's in the tribal area. Now, this thing is probably a good 7 or 8 feet tall, and they call it the snake god statue. It's another item from Africa, and there's not a whole lot known about it, but it is exactly what it sounds like. It's carved in the image of the strange snake that's sort of rising up, and I was standing beside this thing with a hat shack running this time, and one of the guys was running an SLS cam pointed at me, and they saw again, this sort of stick figure, but Dave, it was in the shape of that snake god, and it started lashing out as if it was trying to strike me, like a snake would. And I made a comment to the effect that you can't hurt me because I'm protected. And when I said that, the hat shack says shaman. So, this kind of stuff, these are not common words. A lot of people say, well, there's hat shacks or ghost bosses, they're just, they're just picking up words and you're plucking them out. Well, you've got words that you just don't hear on mainstream radio. And, let's not even talk about the profanities that come out at some of these locations. That's not running on the airwaves.
Right.
So, when you
get these
like
audio
this,
too, David, I don't know if you're finding this, but when we record the audio, when you're hearing the of the stations, first of all, every is another station that it's gone over. And when you hear something say, get out of this house, that's gone over about 20 stations. So it's not one voice from one station that's bleeding through. That's right. It's a voice, and it almost is like a CB radio. When you're hearing the and you hear the voice, it's like over the top of the like it's broadcasting, not like it's part of the sound. At least that's what I found when we use it on investigations. No, it's amazing. I knew Frank Sumption before he passed away, and I used to talk to him some about some of this stuff. And there's a lot of things about these ghost boxes that really fascinate me, Dave. I've noticed that there are often multiple levels of voices coming out of these boxes at the same time, and you can sometimes go back and play back and hear something different, that's sort of an undertone voice. So, again, when you're getting something that's a complete sentence, that's going over a massive number of stations. What are the odds? Right. And I'm with the skeptics strung together. And I understand the cynics on this, and I understand that, sometimes we hear what we want to hear, and there's no lie about that. And then you only hear it because we play it back, and, you heard, and I heard, let's listen to Darkness Radio. Right. And then as soon as I tell you, no, Dave, listen, it said, let's listen to Darkness Radio. And I play it back. Then you hear, let's listen to Darkness Radio. Right. All of a sudden your ear starts hearing it because you've been predisposed to hear this. Mm-hmm. So I understand when you're getting the audio remnants, you are scanning an AM, FM radio. That's why I tell people, don't ask questions like, how many of there are you? What year did you die? Anything like that, because over the radio, the most common things you're going to hear is, it's 3:00. It's, 82 degrees out on this beautiful sunny Monday. We've got a 4-car pile up on 394 and 62 expressway. And, so there's numbers constantly. So you've got to be real cautious. And then the other thing is when you're doing these things, you've got to get an immediate response. And I'll real quickly, I'll tell the story. I went to the Palmer House over Memorial Day weekend with my children, up in Sauk Center, Minnesota. It's like a home away from home. We love to go up and visit. And my kids are really excited about the idea of ghost hunting and investigating and trying to bridge that gap. And we went into one of the most famous rooms, Lucy's room. And they had never used the Shack Hack before. So, and the reason it's called a Shack Hack, folks, is it's a radio from Radio Shack that has been manipulated so that it continually scans. Bill Chappell actually created the first Shack Hack. I don't know if you knew that, David.
I don't think I did. That's interesting.
He's the first one, and he had the videos on how to hack them and everything. But we're sitting in there, and we went into Lucy's room, and my daughter had my SLS camera, and my son had the Shack Hack, and we sat down, and I sat in the chair next to Lucy's chair, which is a famous room there. My daughter stood by my side with the SLS camera. We had the radio going on the bed, and my son sat on the bed. We're trying to communicate with Lucy. We're getting no response. And I go, is Raymond here? Now, Raymond is the ghost across the hall. No sooner do I say, is Raymond here? There's about a beat, a half a second. Is Raymond here? I'm Raymond. Comes through the radio that clear. That clear over the ch-ch-ch. And my son goes, Dad, it just answered. I said, I heard that. And I go, Raymond, are you upset though? Because sometimes he's cranky. I go, are you upset that we're here? Do you want us to leave? And clear as day, as soon as I get done, you hear the same voice go, leave the room. And my daughter, son, and I, we didn't need to corroborate what we heard. We all said, it wants us to leave. It said, leave the room. We all got up and walked out of the room. So it was fascinating to me because, again, that was an immediate response, and it was in response directly to the question that I asked. And to me, again, what are we dealing with? How are we getting that kind of communication? So I love the Shack Hacks and those radio boxes because it's, it's for the MTV generation. We want it and we want it now, right? And this seems to be possibly a communication device. As much as I hate, and I like to be skeptical too, and I don't buy into everything I hear. When I hear something that clear and that immediate, and it's not just me, but there are three of us all hearing the same thing immediately after asking a question. Raymond, are you here? I'm Raymond. Do you want us to leave? Leave the room. Okay. There's that leaves no more doubt in your mind about what's going on. So fascinating kind of stuff. So I'm glad that you like to employ the radio boxes as well to see if you get any kind of action.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've got a wide range of those things that I've, collected over the years. And, it's, I've tried all kinds of different experiments with them because it's all experimental when it comes down to it. So, we don't know. I'm willing to, give, if there's a conscious entity or whatever it is that's there, every opportunity that I can for it to try to make communication.
Very cool. Listen, we're up against a break. I want to make a quick mention. Tomorrow, Robert Major and his sister will be joining me to talk about ghosts, the invisible epidemic. He's going to talk to us about ghosts that interact with and disrupt living human beings, ghosts that seem to possess human beings, and what can be done. Robert and his sister are very proficient, and this is something that might interest you, Dave. When they made their first claims reaching out to me to be on our show a number of years ago, and that they could help people and remove ghosts from them, it sounded so crazy. She goes into these trances and she'll tell you who the ghost is and why it's there, and they'll work together not only to remove the ghost, but to help kind of seal you to keep these things from reattaching. And, it was interesting fodder to listen to and hear some of their stories. And then I started having listeners write in that needed help. So I started putting them on Robert, and Robert would reach out. He and his sister Antoinette would help. And I did this. I think we did 3 or 4 shows with them, and I had people reaching out to them constantly. I never got one letter back saying these people are hacks. Not one letter back ever telling me it didn't work. That's fascinating to me.
That is, yeah, absolutely.
And Robert is an interesting guy, fascinating guy. So is his sister. We're going to talk with them tomorrow about ghosts, the invisible epidemic. Then, on Friday, we've got a great show lined up for you, the Mojave Mysteries. We're going to talk about some of the weird stuff that happens in the Mojave, and our guest will talk to us about this. Mike Behrman, and he's got really strange things: UFOs, cryptids, devil cults, murders, ghosts, and more, plus a brand new Theater of the Mind you'll want to tune in for. That's this week on Beyond the Darkness. And if you missed it, we had a brand new True Crime Tuesday that I think everyone should hear, and especially if you have children, nieces, nephews in your life, you should hear it. I Am Jane Doe. It's a documentary that's now available on Netflix. It's also available on Hulu and Amazon. But please check out the documentary and give a listen to our interview. It is one of the most powerful true crime episodes we've ever done. And I think you will really take a lot away from it and just to educate and enlighten yourself to what is really going on out in the world around us. When it comes to trafficking and the children in our lives. So check it out. And you can find that by going to darknessradio.com. Click on the True Crime Tuesday banner, and that'll give you all the information on how you can subscribe. It's only $5 a month. We'll be back. We've got more Beyond the Darkness right after this.
Beyond the Darkness.
David Weatherly is our guest. The Haunting of Ripley's is our topic this evening. We've been talking with David Weatherly. He's been a frequent guest on our show and is responsible for some of the most terrifying books out in the marketplace. So if you're looking for a good read, check out Strange Intruders, Haunted Toys, Wood Knocks, Volume 1, The Black-Eyed Children, and more. And he's got a new book coming out a little bit later on this year about haunted ships and lighthouses. We might even try to get a story out of him about that. But he is an investigator, author, world explorer. He's here this evening talking to us about his investigations of the Ripley's Believe It or Not museums. And we heard about the first one. Now, let's start to get into the other location that you were called into. And again, was this staff that asked you to come in and check it out, or were you referred from the original museum saying, hey, you should go over and check out this place?
Well, interesting enough, it's one of the folks that worked in Panama City was asked to take over management in Ocean City. Now, Ocean City, Maryland is, it's an older location. It opened in the 1980s, and it had fallen into, not so great condition. It needed refurbished, and the Ripley's corporate people decided we want to send someone in to really kind of kick this thing into high gear, and they offered it to our friend Brandon from Panama City, and he agreed to take it on, and he went up actually early this year and started remodeling. Now, we always know what happens in a lot of these locations when people start doing remodels or, doing a little bit of construction and things like that. And, sure
Definitely
enough.
Start stirring up a lot of action. Why? I'm curious. Why do you think that is, David? Why would ghosts care if we're, putting in a new countertop or we're, changing, the layout of a room? What would it even matter to them?
Like a lot of things, Dave, I don't think there's one specific answer, but I can give you a couple of possibilities. I think on one level, I've seen it happen in a lot of older locations, and it seems to be simply a reaction to change. If Aunt Martha, passed away in 1940 and she continued to, a portion of her spirit even continued to stay in that house, going through her routines as if everything was the same, and all of a sudden, it gets changed. That's very chaotic and very disruptive. So I think that, a conscious spirit would try to express itself, in a way to communicate its lack of satisfaction with that going on. Just imagine, Dave, if somebody you didn't know came in your house and started remodeling, how would you react?
As long as I'm not paying for it, I don't mind.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe not if they, put in a paisley countertop or something that you didn't care for.
That's true.
So, I think it's energies that are set in their ways. And of course, I think that sometimes, we're dealing with residual energy, or, there's the old stone tape theory that impressions of things can be recorded on an area. And if you change something that is inherent in the nature of that recording, then you're going to cause some kind of disruption and cause, shifts in how it's expressing itself. But now the location in Ocean City, it had quite a history of being haunted, because people that have worked there in the past, I talked to a couple of past employees, and they said, oh yeah, I worked there years ago, and it was, it was always kind of a creepy place. Part of it was, unsettling to be in by yourself alone at night and things like that. But they've had some really fascinating things at this location. Now, as I said earlier, the first part of the building was constructed in the 1920s and was a dance hall, and it was added on to after that. Now, Ocean City has a boardwalk, sort of it literally is this long, wooden boardwalk on the beach. And curiously enough for me, I spent a lot of time there in the 1970s when I was a kid. So this was a little bit surreal on that level, going back there for me. I hadn't been there in probably since the 70s. And of course the Ripley's was added after that, but a lot of things were the same yet completely different at the same time. And going in this location, which is at the far end of the boardwalk, was a pretty fascinating experience. And they've had occurrences in there. Brandon told us that they would have areas of the museum they felt like someone was literally walking right behind them when they were in there at night. They had some strange things show up on security cameras. And one of the things that fascinated us, now we'll be putting this up on our channel because we actually have permission to use it. There is an area in the museum that has torture equipment. And the theme is sort of imprisonment to varying degrees. So you have everything from an Iron Maiden to various shackles and things that were used throughout history from the medieval times on. And there is a wall in this part of the museum that has several framed documents on it. They are different legal documents. And at one point, security cameras captured this this bizarre occurrence at 3-something in the morning. All of a sudden, one of those documents is ripped off the wall. And Dave, it's kind of, when you watch the footage, it's as if it's peeled away from the top down. And I have to sort of describe this. The document is from the 1500s. It is in a glass frame, a wooden frame with a glass over it. And the frame is attached to the wall on all sides because, these are historic documents. We're very careful with these things. So it was mounted very securely on the wall. But what happens is it's just ripped off. And actually, Brandon told us that, most of the frame actually stayed on the wall. It's just the glass and the document that came down. It lands flat on the floor. There's a couple of beats, and all of a sudden it sort of jerks sideways in a different direction, as if something just kicked it or just pushed it aside. And I was so intrigued. I looked at this footage over and over again on the security camera, and there's a strange little light anomaly that occurs when this happens, and it smashes through the floor and gets brushed aside. And of course, we tried to follow up on that. One of the first things I wanted to do was see the document and find out what it was. Well, it turned out to be an arrest warrant from England from the 1500s for a soldier who was a deserter. And we weren't sure if there was something about that particular document or something on the wall in general or just that area in general. So during follow-up and trying to explore and get some more information as to what was going on there, we put Dave Spinks to work there because now Dave is former law enforcement and he actually worked for the Bureau of Prisons. So, here you've got a lawman, a warden, no less. He wasn't a warden, but he was worked for the Justice Department. So he worked in the Bureau of Prisons. And, here he is trying to get some reaction and goad whatever's there into saying something. Now, we consistently kept getting bits of information, and we were getting something with the name Robert over and over again. And at one point I said, let me take a look closer at this wall. I looked at all the various documents. There is a book that is open in a glass case that is mounted to the wall underneath these documents. it turned out to be a log of prisoners from San Quentin. And we're still following up on this information, but the book was opened and you could see two prisoners. The one on the left side, his first name, they had just registered the letter R as his first name. So a weird little synchronicity. We don't know whether this guy's name was Robert, but it was kind of crazy that came up. And then, we're getting all of this Robert over and over again about this document. And something was very, very unhappy with Dave being over there, I can tell you. And, sort of came at him he felt like he was touched several times and something was getting very angry, on the various ghost boxes we tried to use. And, at one point, again, the good old SLS cam, we saw something manifest. Dave was sitting on the floor by the wall where all these documents were. And Dave, this figure manifested trying to hit him. I mean, it was going to town, trying to punch him in the head. And, at one point I was off camera. I said, swing back at it or tell it to stop. And he did both, he kind of swung at it and he said, stop it. And it just completely vanished. So, we do those kind of things to, of course, to, dispel any kind of, the skeptic side of things, is it a reflection or, what is it? But there's so many times I see clear interaction with stuff from these various devices like the SLS cam and, we use thermal imaging and all kinds of different stuff. So that was one of the fascinating things that we had happen in that particular Ripley's. Another one was, again, the tribal room, which is smaller in Ocean City. There is a single shrunken head in that particular location. There is a large display case that has some fascinating items in it. Among them is a 5-piece outfit that is the garb of an exorcist from Tibet. And much of it is made of bone. There's a lot of the artifacts in that area that are made of human bone, as a matter of fact. So this was pretty compelling to me for a couple of reasons. One is that the first night we investigated in there, we got in really late. We sort of did a really rapid tour through the Ripleys that Brandon just kind of ran us through and said, here's a couple of the hot spots where we're having weird things. And he told us that the tribal room was an area of great discomfort for more than one of the employees, that people felt like something was following them when they were in there, that they always felt like something was right behind them. They didn't like to be in there at night when the museum was closed and so forth. And he kind of pointed to the case and he said, there's a bunch of different items, a bunch of African items and so forth in there. So, doing sessions in there afterwards, and of course, as you're in complete darkness pretty much, I actually thought I was getting some kind of response from some kind of African spirit or something that was in that case, and had an interaction that seemed to be directly trying to communicate with me. And this was through a number of things with, noises, audible sounds, the footsteps. Dave, the disembodied footsteps in this place are just unreal. We literally a couple of times thought someone was running towards us. It sounded like we thought it was a physical person. We were convinced. There's a ramp that goes from the tribal room up into another area. And the sound is somebody running on that ramp towards us. And, we're all putting lights over there expecting that something's happened, that, someone's come running in. There's nothing there. Nothing. And at one point, I was doing a session in this tribal area by myself. The other guys were in a different room, the next room over. And they reported that they heard this whistling sound. They were sure that it was coming out of the tribal room. And in fact, at one point, one of them thought that I did it. I said, no, I wasn't whistling. For 2 nights investigating that place, we kept hearing this whistling sound. And here's something really freaky, Dave. We not only heard it audibly, but on a couple of occasions, it came over the shack hack. like a human whistling or a whistling sound from a flute or something. This long whistling sound. Well, lo and behold, one of the creepy artifacts that's in that tribal room
right.
is a flute made of a human thigh bone.
Huh.
And it's sort of dangling there in this case, hung up by a string over in the area where everyone kept hearing this whistling sound come from.
And there was no air conditioning vent above it or below it that might be causing that?
Nothing. Everything was shut down.
Very weird. Now, are they pretty open about this? Does it seem like they're, would like the exposure for this as well to draw in people as a curiosity? I think Robert Ripley would love that aspect that, not only do I have all this great collection, but my museums are haunted. Believe it or not, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? No, I really think Ripley's would be fascinated by it. I know that, they had to check with corporate certainly when we did Panama City, and they were okay with it. And I know that the Ripley's in St. Augustine, which I have not investigated, it's pretty well known to be haunted. So they are open to the idea. And again, I think in the spirit of Robert Ripley, why would they not be, right? Because like you said, the potential is there because the combination of these things being in historic buildings, in historic cities, certainly St. Augustine. I mean, gosh, there's reports of spirits up and down the streets in that town, and, you've got sort of the perfect storm when you combine the history of the buildings, the locations, and then you throw in all these crazy artifacts from all over the world, literally from all over the world. I mean, that tribal room we were in, Dave, there's stuff from Tibet, from Africa, from Papua New Guinea. There's a shrunken head on one side of us, and on the other side of us, there's a cannibal fork. And then in the other corner, a cannibal fork, which let me tell you had a really creepy vibe, man. It's this wooden, again, it's one of those things that almost looks a little comical when you first see it because you're thinking, no, come on, what is that really? But it's this large wooden thing that's carved, with a handle and then these sort of, I think there are 4 prongs that kind of stick straight off it. And this thing was used by some of the cannibal cultures to eat human flesh.
Wow. Yeah, what an exciting place. It's interesting, strange histories, and that Robert Ripley had the foresight to collect these items and bring them with him, and he bought multiple copies of items so that he would have them to share, because a lot of that culture might be lost to us by now.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because of course, most of these cultures, I mean, there's not any cultures that we actively know of that are still shrinking heads or eating human flesh and so forth. If they're certainly buried way back in the jungles or islands somewhere. But Ripley, I think he was just such a fascinating person and obviously had some kind of incredibly good karma to go in and interact with these cultures, and get into a lot of places that, at the time, a lot of people that attempted it probably would just never heard from again. But no, Ripley would go and he would come back with trunk loads of this stuff, just fascinating artifacts. And, some of the things he collected, of course, he collected a lot of oddities and there's always, most of the Ripley's museums, you'll see, like a room of animal oddities, with the replicas of the 2-headed calves and things like that we found over the years. And, all the trivia that adorns the walls with, all the bizarre facts that he would uncover and so forth. But, his whole passion for uncovering the weird, so to speak, it's a different type of inspiring, I think, for a lot of people like us that are in this field, because, so many things that you look at and you just kind of scratch your head and you go, geez, man, really? Really that happens?
Do they cover any of the cryptid aspects of, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, anything like that in these museums?
Not a whole lot. I think that's kind of a I think that's a gap in a sense that they haven't really delved into much, because they seem to, I think Ripley's whole theme was kind of trying to stick to things that had absolutely been proven, or absolutely said, these people really shrunk these heads. Here's one to prove it.
Right.
That type of thing. So, no, not that I've seen. They haven't really covered any kind of things like that.
Well, very cool. The explorations,
yeah,
the explorations of Ripley's are awesome. Did you have any other stories from the Ripleys, or should we move on to a couple other topics now?
Oh, we can hit a couple other things. That's fine. We could talk about Ripley's all night, but those are kind of some of the highlights. And again, fascinating place. And if you got a Ripley's nearby, man, by all means, check it out. You'll be very intrigued.
Well, I'm curious. You brought up the SLS camera quite a few times. Have you ever employed the SLS camera during a cryptid investigation? And if so, has it yielded any results for you?
I have a few times, and I haven't gotten anything particularly fascinating at this point. No.
Okay. Now let's talk cryptids. I know that you do quite a bit of investigating with that. What are some of the more fascinating stories that you've heard recently? Some of the reports.
What's really interesting right now for people who haven't heard about this yet, there's this incredible wave of sightings taking place in Chicago. And they are reports of a flying humanoid that some people are saying resembles a giant bat. Others are calling it a giant owl. So, we're getting these terms like the owl man and things like this. And of course, there have been connections to Mothman in the midst of all of this happening. Now, this is really fascinating to me. And, I'm seriously thinking about trying to get up to Chicago to follow up on some of this stuff, because I have not been up there to personally interview any of those witnesses. So I'll just give that, caveat at the front. But I can tell you multiple organizations and people are receiving these reports. The UFO Clearinghouse has received some of them. The MUFON organization, which their reputation is not real great right now anyway, but they purportedly have received a lot of these accounts, and a few other investigators. And it started...
Well, let's so that people understand that remark. I don't know that a lot of people know what's going on with MUFON, but there was I'm taking it you're referring to the one MUFON official that was posting quite racist comments online. Is that what you're referring to? That kind of...
Absolutely correct, buddy.
And he's one of the directors out of Pennsylvania, I believe. Is that right?
He's a multi-state director, and so there's a lot of controversy, and we don't, of course, want to talk about all the gossip stuff and all that. But the fact is that some very unsettling things were posted online, and that's what has led to a big controversy with MUFON currently. So,
not anything to do with their research, folks, or the way they report it. Simply that there's one bad apple, definitely upsetting the apple cart here. All right, so go ahead. Now, so MUFON's getting reports of this. Other groups are. These flying humanoid creatures, that's bizarre. So some are saying they're like a giant owl. Some are saying it's kind of like the Mothman image as well.
Yeah, this is crazy, Dave. I mean, the first one that showed up was early April, and it occurred in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. So this report came in that a woman who was professional went out to walk her dog in what's called Oz Park. It's part of the Lincoln Park neighborhood area. And she went across the street into the park, and she found that her dog, which I believe was a Jack Russell, was suddenly very hesitant and normally is very exuberant about getting to walk in the park, but was literally pulling against the leash and didn't want to go into the park. So she had to almost drag the dog, into the park area, and she began to go through the park, and she saw what she described as a 7-foot tall humanoid figure with a pair of wings. Now, this figure was standing in the park looking away from her. And as she stood looking at this thing and sort of taking it in, its head turned and looked at her, and she said the eyes were red. At that point, its wings unfurled behind it. She said the wingspan was what she estimated was about 10 feet. And Dave, it let out this weird screech and took off into the air.
And we're sure Dennis Rodman was not in town.
So, I mean, if it was just a one-off report, we could say, okay, well,
right.
Maybe this person had a great night at the bar or something, but, again, this was a professional woman, she wasn't looking for any kind of attention. She didn't want her name used because she said, look, I've got because of my job, I don't want this getting out, but this is what happened. And, I just want other people to know, in case they have weird encounters in the park. Well, about a week later, so we're at mid-April, MUFON received a report. Another person saw something just like that. Right behind that, a day later, another incident in Humboldt Park.
Oh,
so we start seeing all of these things play out. By the time we get to, I think it's the fourth sighting, was pretty intriguing because the fourth sighting took place,
well, and it's important to know, too, David, are these reports, what I think is interesting is that they're going into different organizations. So it's not
That's what fascinated me.
Right. It's not like it's all being advertised or being talked about, right? This wasn't public knowledge. It was kind of just independently collected by these different organizations.
That's correct. So it's only when we get a few reports in that it really starts to become more, more people are paying attention to it and more stuff's being posted online. But a few of the following sightings really intrigued me because one, we had, some people on Lake Michigan in a boat and they were out with a little birthday party or something. As I recall, it's 3 couples. They reported seeing, again, 7-foot tall humanoid that was flying over the water, circled their boat 3 times, and then took off. Now, all of the people reporting these sightings are pretty consistent. They're all saying that these figures are somewhere around the 7-foot tall. They're saying that the eyes are red. One report said that they were orange or red. And they're all describing the figure as being solid black in color. There's a little bit of variation, slight, with the description of the wings, because some people are saying that the wings are almost bat-like, like it's some type of membrane or something.
Leathery, okay.
Leathery, yeah. And one person, in fact, even described it as something akin to a gargoyle that they saw flying. But what was fascinating about the 3 couples out on the lake was that they watched this thing circle the boat 3 times, take off, and they had a feeling of dread. Now, they decided,
good God,
they immediately thought, well, we should probably head back into shore. So it's been about 5 minutes that have passed since this humanoid has taken off. They then saw a bright green object that they estimated was maybe a couple of miles away, streaking through the sky, moving in a north to south direction. And that's pretty weird because, now we have sort of a UFO component coming into this thing, along with this cryptid. Now, there's a couple other things that fascinate me about these sightings. One of the reports came from a law enforcement officer that said he was out with his son and witnessed this thing. And, people that are trained in law enforcement, they're usually much better observers. They're not going to be as apt to mistake something, in a common animal or something like that. Now, this law enforcement officer, he said the same thing as many of the other witnesses. He said that it was around 7 feet in height, that it had an 8 to 10 foot wingspan, that the wings were bat-like, but the figure was humanoid. This happened in Calumet Park, which is the south side of the city. So we're getting down close to Indiana border. And he said that this thing took off at a speed that he estimated to be 40 to 50 miles an hour. So, there's something really bizarre going on in Chicago, buddy. And I'll tell you something else that's really kind of brings in the creep factor for me, because I've been researching these sightings. And
wait a minute, we haven't even gotten to the creep factor part yet?
Oh, well, no, not really.
Okay.
I might have to explain it some, but let me do that. I referred to Mothman earlier.
Right.
And we can dig into Mothman a little bit if people aren't familiar with the history. But I'll tell you, Dave, because I know you are, quite a number of these sightings of this bat-like humanoid in Chicago have occurred around bridges.
Oh, no.
Now, if that doesn't unsettle you,
Yeah.
that doesn't unsettle listeners, then let me make clear why it should. Right now, 2017, we are in the midst of the 50-year anniversary of the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. 1966 were the first sightings of the creature. Okay, so last year was actually an anniversary, but this year is a much more somber anniversary, because 1967, 50 years ago, was the year that the Silver Bridge collapsed. So to give some background on that, the Mothman was a strange flying humanoid figure that began appearing around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, late 1960s. 1966 was the first sighting. And people variously described it as this winged humanoid with glowing red eyes. It chased some witnesses. It did all these bizarre things. People saw it numerous times in 1966 and 1967. And in 1967, December 15th, during rush hour, the Silver Bridge, which connected Ohio and West Virginia, collapsed during rush hour. It was a terrible tragedy. 31 vehicles went into the river. 46 people lost their lives during this tragedy. And the Mothman wasn't seen in Point Pleasant after that. So, there's all these things about the Mothman and the idea that the creature was some kind of an omen of coming disaster, and that he was, of course we have many questions. Did the Mothman create the disaster, or was he trying to forewarn people somehow, or, what's the connection there? And there's so much more to the Mothman story. There really is in Point Pleasant that, if you're interested in high weirdness to any degree, you gotta read the Mothman Prophecies, by John Keel.
Right.
The movie doesn't completely do it justice, because it's just bits and pieces, but the book is mind-boggling. And, we get this situation where this bizarre creature starts appearing, and it culminates in this tragedy. Now, through the years, there have been rumors of other sightings of the Mothman, or a Mothman-like figure, around disasters. There's a lot of people that say he appeared before the Fukushima disaster, for instance. And there are reports that claim that they saw a figure like that. So now, what's going on in Chicago? All of a sudden, we've got this bizarre humanoid figure showing up in Chicago. Multiple witnesses.
Now, David, I grew up in the Chicagoland area, about 22 miles west of Chicago. I was there till I was 20. I remember when I was a kid hearing stories of some large bird-like creature that had been known to snatch up a couple of kids from time to time. Are you familiar with this story in the Chicagoland area?
Yeah, there's a few stories in that region. And in fact, back in 2011, there were, 3 or 4 accounts of a flying humanoid that showed up. But it literally was only, just a very quick handful of counts, and then it stopped. You go back a little bit further, you get into that region. There's actually a lot of stories of thunderbirds that come out of Illinois, Pennsylvania, that whole region. And, there's stories of them coming down and snapping up children. And for those not familiar with that term, thunderbird, which comes from Native American lore, is literally what it sounds like. It's this giant bird with a massive wingspan that's capable of picking up a human child and fairly large animals and so forth. So there are those stories that go back there too. And
now, are you familiar, David? A number of years ago, I want to say maybe 8 to 10 years ago, I was being bombarded with people trying to talk to me about these humanoid figures that were flying. It was either Mexico or New Mexico, and I get confused because there were two different videos. One took place in Mexico, one took place in New Mexico. One was all of these silver balls dropping out of the sky, and they were everywhere in the sky flying around. The other one were these figures that almost looked like, cloaked from head to toe, these black witches flying through the sky. Do you remember any of that?
I sure do. And in fact,
and do we know anything about that? Yeah.
Well, we know little bits and pieces. I talked to a witness to one of those things in, where was I? Chile several years ago. There's actually a lot of accounts like that come out of Central and South America and, even up into the southwest of this country. And, they refer to them as witches. The reason being, the Hispanic culture thinks that this is what they're dealing with when they see these things.
Right.
And it's really weird when you start listening to the accounts, because I'll be honest with you, David, it's a real head scratcher, because you're hearing these accounts and you're thinking, well, this could be some kind of a strange cryptid, because it sort of sounds in that territory. But then it starts to sound almost alien in nature, because, as you pointed out, some of the accounts say that there are these silver balls, that they're talking about. And, right. Some of them talk about these flashes of light that the things appear and disappear in. And, it's a really intriguing phenomenon. Now, I haven't heard any of those reports in quite some time.
Right.
So I don't know if we're just in a lull or whatever with that. But,
well, I was fascinated by those Black Witch videos, and you could probably find them online. Just look up Mexico or New Mexico and humanoid creatures flying, witches. You'll see the videos. And again, they almost look too good to be true.
Yeah, they do. They do. And right. I tried to track down a few of the people that had posted those things and because I always like to get to the source. I want to interview the person. I want to talk to the person. I want to go to the site. If I possibly can. And that's been impossible to do with most of those accounts. Now, I have had a few interesting, interviews that I've conducted, as I said, in places like, Chile and Argentina and so forth. And you get some weird accounts, out of that part of the world. There's a number of people that claim they've seen what they describe as a gargoyle down there. And, these reports come out of Argentina. It kind of sounds like what we're dealing with in Chicago, that it has leathery wings. They see it, perched on telephone poles or on buildings and so forth. And, it was even one guy, I believe he was in Argentina, that claimed that this thing attacked him. And he ended up with these weird scratches on his back that the doctors couldn't explain. So, there's so many fascinating mysteries out there, man. And I just, I want to explore every one of them.
Do you ever draw a line? Is there ever one where you start to hear reports and it sounds so creepy you have no interest in going out?
No, those are usually the ones that intrigue me all the more.
Really?
Yeah.
I give you credit, you world traveler. Because doing what we do on the show, there's been a lot of places. When I first heard about the Assetti Ranch out in Trout Lake, Washington, I had to go. I felt I had to go, and I went and I saw things. Have you had a chance to go explore there yet?
I have not been there. I've been invited there, but I just haven't had a chance to fit it in the schedule yet.
David, get out there. It's crazy. Make sure you go when it's a waxing moon or new moon, when there's nothing, when it's the darkest it can be out there, because the skies are crazy over his property. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's funny how many researchers like yourself that are fascinated by these topics of UFOs and strange cryptids, and they haven't been out to that location. It's a mecca. I've been out there 3 or 4 times. I've never once been let down by the high weirdness of the location and how much stuff is going on.
Yeah, there's some places you go to, that it's just, something's going to happen every time you go. Point Pleasant, I've had a lot of weird experiences in Point Pleasant. There's some haunted locations. I tell you, Dave, the last couple of years, I have been in one of the most unsettling haunted locations that I've ever been in 40 years. And that was in Indiana. And, it's just, there's all, yeah. Well, that's, I'll tell you, I'll start off with a bang on this one.
Okay. And don't worry, I'll keep it quiet. We'll just keep it between you, me, and our 250,000 closest friends.
Yeah, right.
So don't worry about it.
Let me tell you something, man. 40 years doing this stuff, I've been pushed, I've been scratched, I've been, touched. I mean, all number of things. The first time, and this was 2 years ago, first time this ever happened to me, I was bitten by something unseen that left the shape of a small human mouth on my leg through a pair of jeans.
Through the jeans?
Through the jeans. So I'll set this up for you and tell you what happened with this situation. This is one of the darkest locations I've ever seen, quite honestly. It really is. It's a small little farmhouse, and it has a really nasty reputation for a lot of different things. There's not a lot known about the history of it, which is kind of part of the intrigue, I think. And what happened was to set this up, there's been a few teams that have investigated this thing, and there were rumors that in one of the rooms in particular, that there was something that didn't like women in this particular room, and it would push them. Okay. So we were running a ghost box in this room. Dave Spinks was with me. We only the two of us in this place, and we were running a ghost box, and we had something that seemed to be communicating, but it was really kind of being a smart aleck with us, to put it kindly. And I said, okay, if this thing is so intelligent, I want to try a test. So I said, Dave, keep running that thing. I'm going in the front room. So I went into the front room of the house. There is an antique piano in there, and it has a piano bench in front of it. Now, there's a lot of people that say activity happens right around where this piano is, because there's a doorway next to the piano that goes up to the second floor, and there's only one room upstairs. So I went over by this piano, and I sat down on the piano bench, but I didn't tell Dave what I was doing. I said, okay, ask it if I'm sitting or standing. The immediate response on the ghost box, which I could hear it, it said standing. And I said wrong. Now, as soon as I said that, I was sitting on this bench, Dave, and I was sort of straddling it. I felt what I can only describe as it felt like a kid, maybe, moving under the bench, like from behind me and at an angle over where my legs were. And Dave, this bench got shoved. It was trying to shove me off this bench.
Wow.
So, I felt the bench lifting it up from below me, and I stood up. And the bench, of course, went flying. And, Dave came running out of the other room. Said, "You okay, man?" And I told him what had happened. And, I felt something against my leg when it happened, but I thought it was just, the sensation of whatever was moving under there.
Right.
Now, we completed the investigation. I actually flew home the next day. When I got out of the shower, lo and behold, on the inside of my left leg, there are teeth marks. And I took photographs of this. I've never seen anything like this in my life. I've never had this happen. So through the jeans, something bit me. And, it looks to be the size of maybe a child or a woman's right? small woman's mouth. Now, what's really bizarre about that is that in a follow-up investigation, we have a lot of people that watch what we do and will send us, we have a lot of people who say they're intuitive and psychic and they will send us, information. Hey, I think, this is happening. Well, we had an intuitive send us information. Now, she didn't know where we were going.
Right.
But she said, you're going, and this was on a return trip. She said, you're going to this location and there's a woman in there who doesn't like men and she will bite.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
So I hope you return and burn the place down, David. It's the only way to go.
Yeah.
Wow, that is awesome.
We've investigated the place quite a few times, and I tell you, Dave, it is there. There's something about this place that is just wrong. That's the only way I can put it. You look at this place and you just think that there's something very wrong.
Well, if you're going back out there this summer, let me know, David. I'd like to join you.
Oh, hey, man, I might take you up on that. Because,
I would love to. I'd love to check out the activity.
Hey, yeah, you got it, man. You got it, man.
Cool.
We just compiled a lot of footage, and we're planning on releasing a documentary on this place just because it's so crazy and unusual and the stuff that's happened there.
Well, keep us in the loop. Yeah, and when the documentary's out, we'll have you back on and we'll get more in depth in it.
Hey, fantastic, man. We'd love to.
Speaking of, we're out of time here, but let's let people know you've got that documentary in the works, but you've also got a new book that'll be coming out this fall, and it's on haunted ships and lighthouses, correct?
That's correct. That's with my co-author of Haunted Toys, Ross Allison. I also have Wood Knots Volume 2 for people who are interested in Sasquatch lore. That will be out this summer. And a DVD on Point Pleasant is coming out in June with some of my investigations and explorations there that Society of the Supernatural, Dave Spinks and I have done. So there's some really creepy stuff in that, too.
We'll put up a link so you can find it here on the Podcast One page and on our page at darknessradio.com so you can keep up with David Weatherly. David, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, you're quite welcome, man. Thanks for having me on again.
It's always a pleasure. Robert Major's with us tomorrow as we talk about this invisible epidemic of ghosts and possession that might be taking place. Robert Major and his sister Antoinette will join us tomorrow on the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.